In this video, I'm going to talk about the endocannabinoid system, part 1, the endocannabinoid system in your brain. And that'll lead us into talking a little bit about how THC acts in there. But we need to know what it's about first. And then in the second video, to follow up this one, a separate video, I'll do one on the endocannabinoid system in the rest of your body. And we'll start to talk about both THC and CBD there. Although CBD does have actions in the brain, it's clearer to look at that elsewhere. So to start out with is the concept of chemical communication all through your body, in your brain, between your brain and your muscles, between your brain and your internal organs, between your sense organs like your eyes and your ears and your brain, the sense organs in your skin sending impulses up to your brain, and hormones that circulate throughout your body bringing chemical information to cells, to different tissues and organs, like thyroid hormone or insulin. These are all chemical messages. Inside the brain, they have a special name called neurotransmitters, but we're not even going to screw around with the terminology. We're going to stick with chemical message. And what you need to think about is that at any time inside the fluids in your brain and in your blood and in other places, there's a lot of chemical messages being sent of different types. They have names: glutamate, GABA, etc., etc. Dopamine, serotonin. You probably have heard serotonin in depression. All of these are chemical messages. Now, how are cells going to sort out which messages are relevant to them? And the only way this happens is what are called receptors. And receptors are proteins that cells have to receive messages from chemical messages swimming around them, sent by other cells. These are all messages that cells send to each other in your brain and elsewhere. And receptors and chemical messages fit together like a lock and a key, more or less. It's actually more like this. They fit together and then there's a little bit of action that closes them together. It's called induced fit. Doesn't matter. But the lock and key theory is the theory that has succeeded in explaining how chemical message number 1 influences only particular cells that have the receptor for chemical message number 1, and chemical message number 2 influences only cells that have the receptor for chemical message number 2. And in each case, we're talking about a lock and a key phenomenon. Now, I'm going to show you some graphics very shortly that will hopefully make this more clear. And by doing so, we're going to realize that endocannabinoids, the cannabinoids that exist in our brains, we're talking about our brains in this video, that they exist there and are made there, and that those endocannabinoids are chemical messages. And there are receptors for those chemical messages. The one we're going to talk about is endocannabinoid receptor number 1 that exists all through your brain. All through your brain. And so something must be going on there if there's a lot of cells that are listening for the messages of endocannabinoids. If they have a receptor, they're listening for that message. Okay, let's start this way. So what I'm showing you here are 4 different chemical messengers in the brain: dopamine, glutamate, GABA, and anandamide. THC is just sitting there for now. And each one has a receptor. Notice not how big anything is, but the shapes. The shape of each of the chemical messages fit into its receptor because they have complementary shapes. That includes anandamide on the right with the endocannabinoid receptor number 1. Hey, here's some eye candy. This is what a molecular model of one of these receptors actually looks like. Okay, curiously, I'm going to start out by going all primitive on you and take a look at something I printed out. The rest of these will be shown digitally, but this one in a printout. I want to point out some things. We have chemical messages here. Glutamate is a chemical message in the brain. It's got a glutamate receptor. that enables a neuron or any other cell to receive the signal from glutamate, and glutamate fits into its receptor like a lock and a key, more or less, oversimplified. But then we also have anandamide, which is an endocannabinoid. Notice that it's also a chemical message. Purple. It's also a chemical message. And anandamide also has a receptor, and it's the endocannabinoid receptor 1. You'll see it abbreviated as ECR1 for endocannabinoid receptor 1. Cannabinoid does the lock and key thing with its receptor, sending a signal. Now notice when we start out here, we have two nerve cells. This nerve cell is ready to send signals from glutamate that it has in its ending here. This nerve cell has glutamate receptors, so it's going to be able to receive the signal from this nerve cell once it releases glutamate. So this is the setup, and we'll see in the next few frames what happens afterward. The nerve cell on the left fires a nerve impulse and releases the chemical message glutamate into the space between the two nerve cells. Once released, the chemical message glutamate binds to its receptor on the right-hand neuron, stimulating it to maybe fire its own nerve impulse. This neuron also makes and releases the endocannabinoid, in this case the A, anandamide, and sends it backward. Quickly, the glutamate's removed from its receptor so that the signal is brief, and more importantly, the endocannabinoid goes backward to the left and sticks to its endocannabinoid receptor on the left-hand neuron, and this means it is sending a signal backward. Since forward is left to right in this brain pathway, backward is right to left. So at this point, you're probably asking yourself, so what? Well, that's the great question that we're trying to find out through research. But here's the deal. Up to this point in time, it was known that nerve pathways, groups of nerve cells and chains of nerve cells, only send information in one direction, what we call the forward direction. So, for example, if I shrug my shoulders, information's got to come down from my brain, down my spinal cord, and out to the muscles of my shoulders, telling them how to move. Now, muscles also send stretch information back up to my brain, but that's in a completely different pathway of nerve cells, a different nerve pathway. It's only the discovery of the endocannabinoid system that has shown that information can travel two ways in the same pathway. In other words, if I send information down to my shoulders about how to move them, in that same nerve pathway, the endocannabinoid system is sending information in the opposite direction. So what's the use of it? My theory, my hypothesis is that it's feedback to clarify the information. Making the information clearer. Like I explained this to you and you say, come on, Vin, I don't understand this very well. Try another way or do it again. And that's feedback information that you're giving me on how clear my information was to you. I think that's what the endocannabinoid system is doing in our brains. I may be wrong. We'll see. So on that note, let's do it again. This is the same situation with a different chemical messenger called GABA. Notice that it's green and it's got a receptor that it can fit into, and we're still having the endocannabinoid system. Two different neurons using a different chemical message, but the same principle applies. Got to do this quick to keep it short. So you see the neuron fires a nerve impulse on the left, releases GABA, a different chemical message. It drifts over to the nerve cell on the right, binds to its receptor, and sends a message. This time the message says, be inhibited. We'll come back to that. And now the neuron on the right synthesizes and releases endocannabinoid, which sticks to its receptor on the neuron on the left, sending a signal backward. Same idea. So what we've just seen is that there are both excitatory and inhibitory chemical messages in your brain. Glutamate, an excitatory chemical message, is associated with the endocannabinoid system. GABA, the main inhibitory chemical message, is associated also with the endocannabinoid system. Why inhibitory messages? Because if you only had excitatory messages, you'd be having seizures, for example, and you wouldn't be able to move your muscles effectively, because most times when you make a movement, like if I do this to Hitler or Mussolini, I have to flex some muscles and relax some other muscles. And so you need inhibition in your nervous system as much as you need excitation. Doesn't matter what the chemical message is, both those systems employ the endocannabinoid system to send information backward. And I'll show you just a couple of other examples where that's also true. By and large, the endocannabinoid system exists throughout your brain. Brain showing the dopamine and serotonin chemical message systems, both of them going from lower brain to higher brain. Dopamine is damaged in Parkinson's, serotonin is associated with depression, but both of them are associated with the endocannabinoid system, just like the glutamate and GABA systems are. So your endocannabinoid system's all over your brain. One more time on this slide, take a look on the right. You see THC has a shape, part of which mimics the shape of an anandamide. THC will stick to your endocannabinoid receptor 1 and will send a signal, but the signal won't be as strong as the signal sent by your endocannabinoid anandamide. So you might be saying, what are you talking about, Vin? I put THC in my brain, it eliminates my pain, or it modulates my pain, it makes me feel more focused, or it gives me a good buzz, it makes me feel better, or it helps me sleep. How can that be if the same endocannabinoid system is present in all our brains? Well, it's not exactly the same, first of all, because we're genetically different. We all don't have exactly the same cannabinoid number 1 receptor. And the other systems, chemical message systems in our brain, are not only affected by genetics, but they're affected by our behavior, our experiences. So our brains are different. So the idea that the same cannabinoid system stimulated by THC can have different effects in different people is not unusual at all. And if you're also thinking in a more sophisticated way, well, if THC is a weaker signal to my endocannabinoid receptor 1, then why does it have so much effect? Well, you're putting a lot more THC in your brain, by and large, than you have endocannabinoid anandamide in your brain. So this is an issue of how much you put in there. And that's a separate issue that we're not going to get into. The last thing I'd like to tell you is this is pretty different from other drugs that people put in their brains. For example, methamphetamine, ecstasy, and cocaine both overstimulate excitatory systems in the brain. The dopamine system included in that, and there's other excitatory systems that MDMA, ecstasy, and cocaine overstimulate, which in fact is why you can get seizures if you take too much or continually take cocaine or MDMA. You're not going to get seizures by overstimulating your endocannabinoid system with THC. Completely different system. And acting in a completely different way. And affecting both excitatory and inhibitory systems in the brain. That's what's so interesting about it. So on that note, I would like to say, so what's going on that note, I would like to say, please, federal government, I'm going to say please in this video, please take it off Schedule 1. Please let the biological research apparatus in this country find out more about what going on at the cellular level translates to at the whole organism level. In other words, the pain relief or the sleep assist or the calming or the clarifying in different brains. And what may be happening there. It's a total puzzle, but we need research. Thank you, federal government. And the rest of you, y'all have a nice day. And I'll see you in the second video in this series about the rest of the endocannabinoid system. Take care. Be well.